Hi, my name is John Sesrie Goff, I believe. That's what the paper says. I'm with the Ford Foundation, and it's my pleasure to be here this morning and to welcome you all to the Solidarity House. Woo! Solidarity House, which is both a space and a practice. I love that. Creating meaningful alignment where imagination meets infrastructure and solidarity becomes strategy. This gathering is designed to strengthen our collective capacity to imagine and build a future of independent storytelling and co-design pathways towards a more sustainable and equitable creative future that centers repair, liberation, and sovereignty. Live captioning for this session is available through Coda, a BIPOC owned web based tool accessible on your device. It doesn't require an account or logins, and our unique links are available via the QR codes posted around the room and on our website at thesolidarityhouse.com/schedule. Our next activation is titled Catalysts and Culture Keepers, Funding Culture Changes. We're grateful to have this incredible, brilliant, beautiful panel of bold, innovative, groundbreaking women. And so joining us is Sharifa Johka with 2043 Ventures and Black Realities. Arij Mikati with Pillars Fund. Nicola Schulze with Women's Foundation California. Aisha Goss with the Center for Cultural Power. And Emily Best with Seed&Spark and Motherboard. Let's give them all a warm welcome and let's begin our conversation. So now I gotta switch to my other device. So y'all gotta give me just 1 second. The first question I have for everybody here today, in your work, and anybody can take this, or we can go down the row. In your work, where do you feel the greatest tension right now between preserving culture and accelerating change? And how do you personally navigate that tension? I gotta take off my vest for this one. It's hot.
It's okay. I feel like panels involve a lot of coordination, phone coordination. But hi, everyone. Again, I'm Nicola from Women's Foundation California. I'm the Senior Director of Communications. And I'm so happy to be here with you all. I think that's such a wonderful question. I think really right now, when I think about culture change and when I think about preserving, I actually feel culture inherently is not a static component to what we do and to what we experience. And I feel at Women's Foundation California, one of the most important things we try to focus on is the intersection and the importance of both policy and culture working together. We believe that one cannot exist or progress without the other. And with the tension between those two subject areas that is often falsely created, I believe, we really need to invest and continue to trust artists to continue to tell us what culture needs to be made, and to really invest in communities and folks on the ground to tell us what they need and to create the culture that serves them and their community. I think too many times we try to consultant it up in philanthropy, and I think relying on artists to tell their stories about their communities is how we need to continue to preserve culture and to continue to move it forward in the way that it never is staying still. And I think that's the beauty of it.
Go deeper with the trust part. How do you trust artists in your work? How do you embody and practice that?
So we have been very fortunate to create a grant-making program called the Culture Change Fund. We started it in 2019, and what we really wanted to do is work with artists in a way that felt sustainable and felt productive in a way that felt good for everyone who was working on the project. I feel like too many times philanthropy and like culture change doesn't happen in a 12-month grant cycle. It just does not. I know. I'll say it. And we have the fortune of working with Aisha and the Center for Cultural Power. We've worked with them for many, many years. And together we worked with other leaders and artists to create different programming where we work with different issue areas, whether it's reproductive justice, whether it's environmental justice, economic justice, criminal justice reform, to basically partner these social justice issues with art that is complementary, and that we can continue to support those artists in a way where we invest in them, we give them time, we step away, and we let them really dictate what they want to do. Whether that's a mural, whether that's a short film, whether that's a collection of GIFs. I'm sorry, I'm one of those people. I can never decide. But it's really about trust. It's really about letting people invest in their work and giving them years to do it. So we did a $10 million project with the Culture Change Fund over 6 years, really allowing folks to invest in their work and invest in their practice in a way that was authentic to them, and to not rely on static metrics that I don't feel actually show impact often.
If you want to introduce yourself and send a question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arij Mikati from Pillars Fund. I'm the Vice President of Programs there. If you're not familiar with Pillars Fund, we are an organization that uplifts the leadership narratives and talents of Muslims in the United States and the UK. And I feel that there are more tensions than frictionless moments these days. It's hard to choose one, honestly, but I think, one thing that we're really struggling with is being an organization that invests in an identity that is so clearly. I will say this: Muslims are the most racially and ethnically diverse community in the United States and in the world. The majority of Muslims in the United States are Black. And so there are so many layers of oppression. So many of our community members are immigrants. I'm from Minnesota, where the Somali community is being ravaged and people are being executed in the streets. So for me, the biggest tension is, how do we keep our artists safe while they make the revolution irresistible?
Yes.
And that's on period.
Now, I have a question, because you work globally, right? And have you noticed a difference between the US and the UK, and how do you personally hold that complexity and nuance of holding a portfolio that has to hold both?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's interesting because mostly the difference is that my UK partners feel really sorry for us. But I will say the interesting thing about having a program that is international is, if you really want to make change and have content that breaks into the mainstream, the systems are so different into how do you break into the UK versus how do you break into the US. The UK actually has a lot more national, federal support for the arts, and they are not shying away from DEI in a way that is quite different from the pullback that we've seen in the last year and a half. So I would say for me, it's becoming an expert in how each of my fellows has to navigate each system. And it's actually, it is basically the same all over the US, but it's kind of the same when I'm working with Los Angeles versus New York versus Chicago. There's such different systems in how filmmakers get their work seen and made and funded. So I would say it's really about building those relationships so you can build those expertise, have your board of directors for your, career advice, et cetera, that are experts in those areas. Because everything moves at the speed of trust. And so really investing in those relationships is what makes it possible.
Thank you. And Aisha?
I think that one of the things we believe at Cultural Power, and that we seem to be true, is that culture moves faster than economics and politics. So the tension that is happening in the political and economic sector is already old. It's almost like the end it's almost like The Wiz, if anybody loves The Wiz like me. There's a scene where the colors keep changing. And there's one point he's like, when you started wearing red, it was already old. The new color is gold. That's what culture is. Culture has already figured out that stuff. We've already talked about what are the stories. We've already figured out what are the perspectives. We've already said, as artists and as communities, we hold our own solutions, and we're waiting. The tension is waiting for the rest of the sectors to catch up. And I think that's where, as an artistic community, we have to take ourselves and think about our own families, think about our own communities, and say, how does my art meet people where they are? And it has to be okay to push them into a new way of thinking, into a new way of understanding the world around them, but understand that they are starting, a lot of them, from a position where the world around them is what takes precedence. It's very hard to make space, and we found this to be really true, particularly in our work in rural areas. It's really hard to make space for storytelling when the prescription you used to pay $6 for is now $600. There are layers of complexities that the political and economic reality creates that makes our storytelling more needed, but also there's more of a journey right now. And being okay with that tension, knowing that folks will get there, and it will be our storytelling, it will be our introduction into a new way of being. A sparking imagination will be what opens up the conversations that creates the public will for change. But we just have to understand that this tension is by design. This tension is meant to keep our communities questioning and looking at each other in a way that is rooted in scarcity rather than abundance. And for us, it's really important that we know that our solutions are already, as we all sit in this room to learn more about funding culture change, somewhere in this state, we are changing a mind. Just by being here, just by the stories that are debuting, that there is a solidarity house is changing someone's mind right now. The work is already happening. And as long as we can find comfort in that, that's half the battle.
That's right. Gotta be seen green. Emily.
Well, I want to first talk about my personal embodied experience this weekend of the tension, which is waking up in the morning yesterday to the news that ICE had murdered another protester, and then coming to Solidarity House and experiencing the solution to the thing that we are all fighting against, and trying to hold that cognitive dissonance that both exist at the same time, as opposed to once we figure this out, that all goes away. And holding those two truths in tension has been a real challenge over the last 24 hours, just to sit in the possibility here and experience all of that, the joy and the capability of a bunch of organizations deciding that we're not going to be kept out of this prestigious, important gathering for financial reasons, that there are 55 organizations that decided to crowdfund Solidarity House. That's what happened here, right? Is that a bunch of organizations that would not otherwise necessarily have a platform at this festival, but who are the organizations actually providing the infrastructure to an industry in free fall, that we might not otherwise have had this opportunity. And everybody just looked at each other and was like, bet, let's go, And so feeling that, and how easeful it was in tension with this time, I think is, to Aisha's point, is that it's that drain, right? Of it's hard to continue the work forward as energy is being drained out in fight for safety, right? But I have maybe a slightly different position than the other panelists in that, I'm not a funder. We build a platform and then we teach creators how to fund themselves.
And we teach creators how to build sustainable careers by really bringing in their audience as engaged constituents in their projects. And of course, like I have bet the whole farm on that being a really, really important part of how we galvanize our community. Because I view the work that we do at Seed&Spark not as like some sort of film funding thing, but as an expression of community care. Because a really great crowdfunding campaign is just an expression of community care. You have to know your community really well. You have to understand what engages them. You have to want to reach out and build all the partnerships, right? But that stands very much in tension with the prestige business of Hollywood. And so one of the tensions that I'm experiencing is our creator community still really kind of wanting to get picked? It would feel so good and so special to get picked. But if you do get picked and you are making something that is really, really politically important, you're going to have to wait to premiere because they're going to take your premiere status. You can't put the movie out right in the most politically salient moment. And then you have to wait to get picked by a distributor. And they're going to take, like I love them. We had the incredible experience, but I made a film about the Equal Rights Amendment. And we had a miraculous outcome for a feature documentary, which is we got bought by Independent Lens. It was like the place that we most wanted to go, but we weren't going to come out until a year and a half after it was actually politically relevant. And so we had to make a decision about whether we wanted to do movie shit, meaning prestige, premiere, blah, 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 or impact shit. And that is a tension that I'm seeing a lot, especially in the filmmaking space, is that the requirements and the deadlines of movie shit work exactly against impact shit. And so we're watching creators having to choose to use these new systems, and it feels like free fall to them, right? Because there's the devil, right? And then there's this new system that we're trying to build that is kind of scary to undertake, but is kind of the only thing we have right now to meet this moment in the way that we need to. And so, and I haven't personally seen, I'm not going to say they're not happening, enough of the conversations about how are we meaningfully changing festival requirements and distribution requirements and theatrical release requirements so that filmmakers are not hamstrung and choosing between, do I get to premiere at Sundance or can I actually meet this political moment, right? Do I qualify for an Oscar or can I put this movie out right now while Palestinians are being slaughtered, right? And people need to understand the history behind that. So I think that's the ongoing tension that we're seeing in our space, is sort of like prestige versus impact.
I must say, prestige versus impact, the impact that this house is having is so important, because I was dealing with text messages about the assault last night at High West and people talking about the organizing we did years ago after the assault outside of High West. I said, well, the issue is in Sundance, because I was assaulted in Union Square. I said I was called a racial explicitives in San Francisco. So the issue is, the issue. And so we need spaces like Solidarity House. And so thank you for that. Sharifa.
Absolutely. Thank you. When you asked the question, so many things sort of moved through my head, but I think when you think about 2043 specifically, so we're a collective of 15 organizations. And I think one of the things that we shared was prior to our coming together, we all made intentional choices of incubating spaces that were designed for us. So we had the soft realities of, the warmth of what it looks like to sort of build within the community that represents you. When we came together, however, we made an intentional choice to enter into this conversation around capitalism and how we might be able to disrupt it. So the organizing of the entity itself was rife with tension, because we had to work through the words that we use, the language that we use. We needed to understand each other, but the words that were coming out of our mouths were hurtful. And they weren't words that we liked. They weren't words that we had wanted to embrace, but we needed to be able to complete sentences and actually have a shared understanding of what we were discussing. And the thing that continues to sort of be sort of most resonant right now for me is this idea of not making the mistake of using speed as a proxy for impact or success. really appreciating and understanding that, as someone has already mentioned, culture has its own timeline, developing community has its own timeline, but we have real investment money that's going to be fueling this work that has their timeline, right? And they have their own expectation of return on these investments. And we're learning that we need to figure out how to mitigate these things and navigate these things in a way that, honors that need, but also really pushes back and has a conversation around educating funders and doing like mini workshops and what used to be a meeting, and making sure that there's room for our work to still have the integrity that it needs while still getting the capital that it needs, while still giving us the responsibility that we've put upon ourselves to get a return on the capital. So a lot of that is, lives in a bed of tension. And what we have decided, I think that we have smartly done, is given ourselves some grace around none of these things are optional. Our integrity is not something that we're going to barter away. Our community is infinite in its value. There's no price for it. And we're not walking away from either of those things. So as we find the resolutions, we have to also honor those two pillars because they're going to always come with us. And that's just what it is. And as we are working towards answers, because we don't have the answers, we're actually identifying them in real time. We've given ourselves permission to experiment with this first fund and to really sort of look at how we're going to identify, property with some integrity that still for us just redefines what risk means, that still has the potential and the valuation to bring the return that we're seeking. And I think that we have to sort of stand 10 toes down on that and really sort of create a new paradigm of what risk looks like and what we can stand behind and support and champion.
So you all at 2043 Ventures explicitly frames yourselves around racial equity and generational outcomes. How do you think about return, financial, cultural, political, when investing in creators or companies shaping culture?
That is that's such a loaded question because, as you can imagine, we have to contend with all three of those things all the time, right? And in this discussion around how are we going to be sort of this investment entity that is going to be able to return that investment and that capital back to the fuel of this sort of work, what's that going to look like? And obviously, financial outcomes are important because ownership is important to us. I mean, the whole mission of 2043 is that we're building wealth for BIPOC storytellers through the ownership of IP. So it's foundational to our ideology, right? So financial outcomes are critical to the work that we're going to be doing. Cultural outcomes are obviously important because narrative power is important, right? We understand that narrative power basically allows for cultural shifts to occur. It normalizes our identities. It normalizes our experiences, our realities. So that's not something we can negotiate away. And then political, outcomes are equally as important because we have to sort of think about, the normalizing our narratives is not necessarily about vanity, right? It's about our survival. So in order to actually do that, we know that the cultural shifts lead to policy changes. And it's those policy changes, we presume, outlive us, right? Because we're all not going to be here forever. And the conceit of 2043, the title itself, is inspired by a couple of things. We're hoping not to be around after 2043, right? It's based on the assumption that sociologists and people who are studying population have identified that in the United States, that by 2043, white folks are no longer going to be the dominant culture in the Americas. They're going to be the population is going to be mostly informed by immigration. We are dying much faster than we are having birth or new babies, right? So that population growth is going to be based on people of color coming to this country, which is why you're seeing the white man's last stand happening right now and this full assault on immigration, right? So with that reality in mind, come 2043, we're not here. What is supposed to survive us are the policies that are inspired by the cultural shifts that these narratives have shared with us. So all of our discussions have been over the past 3 years is how are we going to be sure that we don't leave any of those pillars behind? So for us, they're interdependent. And that's where we landed.
All right. And thank you, Nicola. So, Nicola, the women's funds have long discussed culture as a site of power. How do you translate that belief into funding decisions that move beyond representation towards real structural shifts?
Such a good question. And I feel like with Women's Foundation California, we have been around for 40 years. We are statewide. All of our team is around the state, whether it's Riverside, LA, Bay Area. We're really committed to being in our communities that we're trying to serve. And I think the big question we started to ask ourselves, because we've been doing policy work for 25 years, and we've worked with trying to really work this one program called our Solis Policy Institute, which is where we basically take grassroots organizers who have never written pieces of legislation. Maybe they have been embedded in their communities over a specific issue area. And we actually do a year-long fellowship that is free, where they learn how to write a piece of legislation. We've passed over 50 bills in the state of California. And with all that success and with our continued, we have over 600 folks who have participated in this program. And we are trying to use, and we understand that power when we go to Sacramento. The fact that we are bringing women, people of color, trans folks into that legislative space in and of itself is changing culture. It's changing policy for sure. But what we realized is culture makes the ground softer for the policy work that we need to do. It softens the ground, it lays a foundation, and we were lucky enough to be in community with amazing cultural change folks like Center for Cultural Power. I'm going to reference them a lot. And we were able to work on projects like what we did in Bell Gardens, California, where the Center for Cultural Power partnered with another organization called California Latinas for Reproductive Justice. And what they wanted to do is work on rent stabilization, which we're talking a lot about right now, and is very important in immigrant communities. And Bell Gardens is a predominantly Latina community. And what we did is we worked with artists there on the ground to create and change narratives around housing and reproductive justice. And some folks might say there's not what's the connection between housing and reproductive justice? But really the connection is evident, like where we live is a human right. Housing is a human right. And when you are trying to deal with the health of a child, the health of yourself, whether it's reproductive oriented or whether it's caregiving for a relative or a loved one, like this is all reproductive justice in our mind and is explicitly connected to housing. And so they were able, through creating art, creating some short films, that they were able to really seed the narrative in their own community. And these artists were from Bell Gardens and from around the state of California. And we were able to pass one of the first rent stabilization bills in the state of California. And that exists today. And that could not have been done without culture work and also funding those folks and letting them do the work and do the art they want to do. We did not have very much to say about what did that timeline look like? How did they feel they were going to phase the project? We didn't want to strategic plan it. We really wanted to give artists and the Center for Cultural Power, California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, and the artists who they were working with the space to be able to do that. And that's why we believe explicitly in general operating support and multi-year grant making, because we feel like we need to give folks the time to build what they already know they need.
So where do you see care labor, emotional labor, reproductive labor showing up in cultural work? And how should funding models evolve to recognize it?
That's a good question. I feel, especially with, the care economy and the fact that it is inherently dependent on a lot of women and femme folk is part of the reason it's so under-resourced. I don't have to say culture change is not being funded right now in the numbers it needs to be in. Women and girls, technically, I think when you count all the philanthropic dollars, and it continues to be this way, is like 2% of all philanthropic funding. LGBTQ funding goes to less than 1%.
Not in my portfolio.
And
Over 66%.
We love to see it. We love to see it. And we need more funders to make this a priority. We need to actually fund people of color. We need to fund the folks in their communities that already have the answer. We're tired of talking to funders and being like, well, how do I engage in culture change? And, how do you measure this impact? We don't measure impact in strict data-oriented approaches that a lot of philanthropy is stuck on. We actually talk to community members. In Bell Gardens, we talk to the folks who were able to see rent stabilization when they hadn't before. And to do that in a Latina community, which is explicitly under attack right now, was very meaningful. And I think every city, when we talk about how we're going to change and take care of folks, take care of people in our communities, take care of immigrants, that is a big component. And so care is really putting money behind the folks who already have the answer. And that's what we want to continue to do in philanthropy and push more folks to do the same.
Yeah, to that point, Arij, what do funders still misunderstand about supporting Muslim-led or marginalized cultural work, especially in this highly polarized environment?
Yes. Okay. A couple of things. And I actually think this is related to your point too. Culture change is being funded a lot. It's just the other direction. Yes. We have to name that. People are funding culture. It's just not us. And so we are so outspent right now that we have to just get it together, guys. Yeah. But in terms of the Muslim community specifically, I would say, like I said before, we are the most racially and ethnically diverse community in the United States. A lot of people think, what does that have to do with me? There's someone in your community that is Muslim. There just is. And I think that another issue is, one of you said, I think maybe it was you said that we already have solutions in this room. I think that we have a lot of solutions that come from our faith tradition, right? One of the pillars of our faith tradition is zakat, which is a required wealth tax that everyone has to pay if they're above a certain threshold. That's what we owe to each other. And so we have these models that we have used in our community that can be piloted in a much larger way that I think would benefit everyone. So I feel like we're often not prioritized. And I think that we would love more people to just collaborate with us, think about us, wonder if we might have an answer that they haven't thought about yet. And I think that will ultimately be incredibly useful. And then the last thing that I will say is that I think a lot of people want to fund stories that are very explicit about national security and then trying to shift the narrative within that story. It's so boring. It's 2025. I want to see more stories about Zoran. And I want to see more stories about the taxi cab drivers that he uplifted and changed the culture for. That's a lot more interesting. And I think I just don't want us to be in this little terror box anymore. It just feels so boring. So actually at Pillars Fund, we explicitly don't do national security stories, even if they're progressive. I just don't want to be associated. What was it, Taylor Swift, that was I wish to be excluded from this narrative? I wish to be excluded from this narrative.
How do you think people can have more public conversations around faith and identity? Because I think it's so taboo, especially in spaces of culture, especially in creative art spaces, to identify as a person of faith.
Yeah, it really is. And I think one of the things that I'm really proud of in our program, which gives a $40,000 unrestricted grant to directors and screenwriters that are selected from a too big pool. I wish I gave it to more than 10 people. But similar to what you said, I never ask them what they use that money for. It's either rent or childcare or a medical bill, or it's I'm going to make a short film. I never ask. So I think that's really important. And I would say the other piece of it, can you repeat the question?
Just how does one identify as a
yes,
person?
Thank you. So one of the things that's important in our program is that we do all of these master classes on creative and industry and all of the skill building that they need, but we also do a lot of classes that allow them to connect the fact that their spirituality is what makes their art beautiful, right? Like in our tradition, and I speak very frankly about it, which I think if we all did it more, we would all be a lot more comfortable. Like in Islam, we believe that like God is the ultimate creator. We're creators. Like we can learn from his example, right? Like the creator listens to us. So we have to listen as artists. There's so many things that we can learn. And so it's not a far leap. It's not. And I think any of us that have any kind of ethos, whether it's religious, spiritual, political, whatever, we're all informed by it. And so just naming that and owning that. And I think, again, not leaning into defense mode, which almost everyone in this room has probably had to defend a group they're a part of. We are very much we're not interested in artists or content that say, please let me in, I'm just like you. We're much more interested in content that says, check me out. You're really gonna like it in here. And I think that's the shift that we try to do in our third pillar of our program, which is just to remind them like you are worth being checked out.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. And Aisha, the Center for Cultural Power often describes narrative as infrastructure, which I totally agree with. And I think what's different in the US is that we don't fund infrastructure well. We have crappy roads, crappy utilities, and no trains. I mean, or if you're in DC, the train don't get you nowhere. But what does that mean in practice? And how do you know when narrative work is effective?
I think at the heart of what we do is we recognize that stories change people and people change systems. It really is that simple. But that requires a lot of infrastructure on both sides of what happens in culture change environments. In the artist, yes, artists have a superpower of sparking imagination, but there's also trainings to help folks understand their impact differently, understand how to use their imagination to Emily's point, to think about distribution differently, thinking about connecting to your community differently. And so we offer trainings in how to do narrative strategy, how to do cultural strategy. And then we think about what does an artist need to free up the space so they can create. We have programs where this year, 2025, wow, feels so weird. In 2025, we created a program where we put artists on retainer. Every month, do a thing, respond to the world in whatever form. It can be a poem, it can be a short film, it can be a piece of visual art. The art you see on the walls around you is from a collaboration we did that's around stories of aging for BIPOC communities. And some of the artists that created this are on retainer right now. Every month for the next year, what they use the money for is what they use the money for. Our ask is say something every month. And creating that type of opportunity, saying to an artist, you've got 90% there on the funding you need. We will give you $1,000 to $5,000 to create a thing to be introduced to something else. But we have to think about the infrastructure. Narrative as infrastructure is giving artists what they need, and then setting the conditions on the other side for there to be a different relationship to culture change. So we work with movements to say, it is not you including culture to give an artist $500 for a poster. That is not integrating artists into what you do. There have to be conversations where movements come to understand that culture is what creates the shift, and artists have to understand that movements are not their enemy. Like the relationship can sometimes be extractive on both sides, and there has to be the space to have that conversation. And so at Cultural Power, we think about how do you set the full set of conditions for artists to get what they need as much as we can. How do we have conversations with artists to say, we can be funded differently? We can think about distribution differently. And, we also bring in the data to say it takes 6 touch points for folks to begin to fully change their mind. It takes, those folks did outspend us a lot, but they didn't outspend us in the ways it should have had the impact that it has. When you look at the data, they spent about $5 to $10 million more than we did. They just spent it on the wrong shit. Like we spent it on what we always do, and it doesn't work. And so we try to have those conversations with artists to say, as a part of how you are dreaming your future, think about, you can connect to your audience differently. You can connect to your community differently. And the people that are around you can become your ecosystem of support. And I think that is what we mean by narrative as infrastructure. And we've seen it work. To the second half of the question, we did some work in really rural spaces in America. We found that those are the most under-resourced part of arts and culture in the US, is rural America. And there are people of color, there are immigrants, there are religious minorities, there are folks who really, if you talk to them, they're purple. They're almost agnostic about everything going on in the world, but they don't have as many opportunities to be connected to storytelling that reflect them. And so we went into really rural North Carolina with films about reproductive justice. Some of them were short films, some were longer. And it wasn't us coming in and say, this is an abortion tale. It was just kind of like doing storytelling where reproductive health was a part of the conversation. And afterwards, we brought together folks that were from very fundamentalist Christian spaces, folks who were workers at Planned Parenthood. We brought in people that were men who had never had a space in a reproductive justice conversation, and brought them in to watch the films. And one of the women stood up and said, I would never want an unplanned pregnancy in my house, ever. But when I saw that imagery of the pregnancy test, it reminded me of the COVID test. And it reminded me what it felt like not to have agency, not to have information, not to have a connection to the healthcare that I needed. And I didn't even know how far I had to drive to get to a vaccine. And now I understand the fear related to reproductive justice decisions. And now they're working together to make sure that there are abortion protections. In rural North Carolina, they're working together. And that wouldn't have happened without culture. And it wouldn't have happened without people being open to hearing that there are other things that can be true that don't negate their own experience. I think that's a lot of what we're living through, is people living in fear of their own version of their lives being invalidated. And the work we do at Cultural Power, the way we try to connect with artists differently, is really about creating that space for the change to happen, and accelerating the change even in the creator, to understand how powerful they truly are.
Thank you. Yeah. Emily, how do we move from one-off project support to real sustainability for creators without forcing them into scale models that don't fit cultural work?
I love this question so much. I view what we've been doing at Seed&Spark for the last almost 14 years not as tech startup work, but as like political movement work in that we don't spend any money on digital advertising. We teach workshops on creator sustainability in communities that often don't get those sorts of workshops, especially in person. So we teach about 100 workshops a year. Live, and about half of those in person. It has been a great way to see this great country and all the actually great things about it that are worth fighting for. And I think it comes from maybe this moment. It's been really, really hard over the last 15 years. We've said the same thing for the last 15 years. It's like in the last 12 months, people are listening, which is like, hey, there's giant looming corporate consolidation, which 15 years ago, everybody was like, yeah, but they're writing us these big checks for our shows. And I was like, that's fine, but you're going to pay for it later. And there's big corporate consolidation coming. They are taking away the power. They are absconding with the data. They are surveilling us. They are taking our stories. And the only thing we have is solidarity power, right? So every community that we go to, I think of it, and okay, well, we're talking about bringing religion. I think of it like church planting. Okay, where like I go in and I say, here are all the capabilities that you have in your own community to build sustaining practices for the artist in this community, but it requires every single creator to like get involved, right? If you really want to do it, it requires every single creator to decide we are doing this differently together. We are sharing information. We're not competing with each other. We are, pushing for more arts funding. We are politically engaged in our communities. And what I learned is like people will be like, yeah, that sounds good, but I still want to get picked, right? And so to be perfectly honest, from my perspective, it's really taken the collapse of the Hollywood system, like the catastrophic, clear collapse of the Hollywood system for creators to be like, yeah, okay, because nobody's picking anymore. And so fine, I'll take it. Do you know what I mean? But to me, the sustaining change comes from when we all decide to do it differently, full stop. That applies to sort of everything that's going on right now, including capitalism. But for creators specifically, like, I'm so tired, so I think I'm going to say this in not the most delicate way. I've had the experience a lot of times of creators being like, oh, it's so cool that like Seed&Spark exists, or that, you do this partnership with Kinema for community distribution, or that you've built the distribution playbook. You're really democratizing, independent film. And I'm like, no, we can't democratize anything. What we can do is build like the right to vote. But if you don't use it, there's no democracy. Yeah. So I really been feeling like there is like an urgent use of agency. We talked about this on the panel yesterday, that is needed right now, that says like we have to use these new systems until they work for us. And that is how we get off of the one-off project. We are still leveraging sort of the one-off project to try to build from the ground up the audience infrastructure in lots of different categories of filmmaking, the data to back it up, the technology to interconnect all of these pieces. And it's just at this point, it's like a numbers game. It's like how many people will choose to take their projects out into their communities in a meaningfully different way, using these new tools that help teach audiences that third spaces can be theaters. And that those third spaces then become community gathering spaces. And film was just the catalyst, right? And now there's a poetry reading night there. And now and this church basement is now a screening theater. And this coffee shop is now a screening theater. And the more that we take responsibility for creating those conditions, the more then we get to leverage that infrastructure. But like, we have to stop pretending like somebody else is going to do it. And so I see a lot of creators, they will crowdfund, and they'll even like get as far as using Kinema, for example, but nobody's hosting screenings from Kinema in their own communities or in their own basements or at their own churches. And so who's gonna do it, right? It's gotta be us. And I know that's part of the other tension is we're like, well, we're already doing so much. And it's like, yeah. Yeah.
You gotta vote.
Gotta vote.
You gotta take destiny in your own hands. Gotta be like Matthew Knowles. He said for Beyonce and them, he refused to do one-off deals. He said if it was not a multi-deal package, he left it on the table. There were no one-off deals. Be Destiny's Child. So,
I'm with it.
no,
Can I quote that back to philanthropists when approaching them for
I'm
funding?
Destiny.
we only do multi-year funding, 3 years plus. So I'm going to ask one question for everybody and then open it up to the room because I know we have a lot of brilliant people in the room with burning questions. So this is a personal question that I want to ask because I want the answer. Where have you personally had to say no to a project, partnership, or funding trend, even when it was popular or well-resourced? Anyone can go first.
I mean, a very specific situation just popped into my head where a board member, and not from a board that I'm currently associated with in any way, but really just outright, blatantly shared that they were unhappy with our new approach of how we were cultivating donors and supporters. We were moving away from the model of the more you give, the more attention you get. We were leaning into a model of everyone's contribution is important, and they were really upset that their sort of concierge experience was being modified, and threatened to take away a substantial amount of dollars that we actually needed because we were facing the deficit. And there was a conversation about the folks who were attached to that new ideology being removed and replaced. And the leadership, because I wasn't the senior leader of the org at the time, was working on how to do that in a way that made them feel comfortable. And they thought they could do it quietly. And it leaked. And we had to remind them, absolutely not. If we have to shut down for half of the year, we shut down for half of the year. But what we're not going to be able to do is to hold that and carry that. And I was just surprised that that was a conversation, and the clarity in the moment for me was, clear. And I think what it all comes down to, if I have to sort of flatten my own political perspective in order to accommodate you, it's just not a right fit, and I'm not prepared to do it. I don't know how to not be Sharifa. I actually like Sharifa a lot, so I take Sharifa everywhere, and if she's not welcome or invited, we can't hang. So that's sort of been my line. Sharifa has to go. She has to be able to go.
I think finding the words, delicacy is not coming for me either. I will say in the weeks and months following the November 2024 election, we had to say no a lot because that culture shift works was no longer in question. Everyone was seeing in real time that on the other side, culture change had not just worked. It was reaching, it was appearing to reach a type of critical mass where otherwise sane people were embracing insanity. And so we had a lot of folks that all of a sudden were saying, hey, we are really interested in funding what you do, but what they were really interested in funding was what they did, was what the other side did, thinking it would look a certain way, thinking that the timeline would be a certain thing. But narrative shift takes 5 to 30 years. And what we're seeing today was seeded when Obama won the second time. Keeping it real, we are living through a generation of backlash. There is no person that walks into the door, even if they dropped off $1 billion in the center of this room, the impact of that $1 billion wouldn't be fully seen for at least 20 years. And so when people were coming to the door to say, hey, Aisha, I hear you're the new CEO of the Center for Cultural Power, and we want to invest in you to do exactly what we want you to do. I had to say that didn't even work well for Barbara. I had to be real with my staff who needed the resources, but to say these resources won't be what we need it to be for our communities. This will not allow us to pour into artists the way that we've done for the past 14 years as an organization. And we live in an abundant time. Philanthropy has a great role in storytelling right now, but philanthropy didn't fund the civil rights movement in the beginning. It did not fund LGBT rights in the beginning. Philanthropy responds to what we're doing well when it's done intentionally. They see us doing something exciting and they say, we want to invest in you scaling your impact. Not, Aisha, find us 6 influencers that can make funny content just like those Republican guys so that everyone will stop wanting to be a trad wife and everyone, we can't do that. We won't do that. So respectfully and sometimes disrespectfully, no.
You can't go make the progressive Joe Rogan tonight.
No.
I have quite a short answer to this question, which is with Seed&Spark, we're a public benefit corporation. I have been offered private equity roll up. I have been offered purchase, and I have said no. And I have said no because the conditions that protect our constituents and that advance the work were not going to be protected. And I'm very, very, very uniquely lucky to have investors who are down for that, right? So I understand that I'm also, and I think honestly, if the PE thing I was able to stave off, and I think if there were a purchase price being offered a little higher, I might have to fight even harder. But as of now, I'm super aligned with my board that what we have non-negotiables around what an acquisition of Seed. And we do have venture funding, right? So the presumption is we do have to at some point produce some return, but we're 14 years in and we've got really patient capital who understands that our integrity is our business. And that there is no, but I have had to say to people who want to buy us, do you understand that if you do what you're proposing, the value is gone. So I don't know, other than to squelch us from the market, which I don't know, does anybody else here really want crowdfunding margins for their business? I don't think so. But I think it requires saying no to traditional exits, and fighting for advisory alignment or investor alignment that can be very, very uncomfortable. But I think it's the only way we preserve the value of the things that we build, especially while we still have to use these tools of capitalism to try to move the work forward.
I will say really quickly, we always say no to government funding. And the reason for that is because our community has been so disenfranchised through government funding, and they've turned us against each other with that funding. An example would be the Countering Violent Extremism money that was actually funded through the Obama administration, unfortunately. And they were giving it to everyone from, mosques to therapists, which is why our community is so behind on seeking mental health, because even your therapist can report you. So we don't take government money because we want to be in trust with our community and not be at the beck and call of what they would like us to do.
No, I think actually one thing that resonates is social media. Women's Foundation California, we're a smaller team, but we used to, before COVID, we used to run Facebook ads, and we used to try to boost engagement on LinkedIn and all these social media platforms. But we had a meeting where we were like, you know what, and we had a lot of funders who would come to us and be like, oh, why don't you do a social media campaign with X influencer and share your reproductive justice work? And we'd be like, well, that's going to be 3 months of work and it's going to be released in a month, and this artist can't fit that into their timeline. It's just not possible. So we don't run Instagram ads. We don't run any ads across any social media platform. We know who writes those algorithms. And what we really committed to is like organic growth and community building, which is sharing what our grant partners are working on, trying to write about what our grant partners are doing and use more organic platforms. And I think a second example of us saying no is, a little bit more boring, bureaucratic, but I think it applies is, we have a 401k, and our financial advisor person was like, here's a great new fund that's so diversified, you would not believe. I don't know a lot about diversified portfolios, but we looked into it, and BlackRock was one of the folks that was listed. And this was a fund that was marked for like a grade A for gender equity, which we told our financial advisor was our North Star. And all of us, because we usually read the fine print, we looked at it and we're like, nope, this money is going to militarize and directly to Palestine. So absolutely not. We are not going to choose that. We had that financial advisor go back. We reorganized our portfolio. That way it doesn't invest in private prisons. It doesn't invest, especially as they're building up all this infrastructure. We used to try to downgrade private prisons, but now deportation centers are a big money builder. So looking at your 401ks, looking at especially in large foundations where that's a lot of money, take that away from militarization, take it away from criminalized immigration work, take it away from ICE, take it away from, military action in Palestine. Do what you can. I think everyone can say no, whether you're an organization or whether you're an individual.
Yeah, I think it was 16, 17 years ago, Charlie Cobb from SNCC had a personal beef with a social media influencer, political person, because he was like, you got all these followers, but it doesn't mean anything. He said, I wish we had that when we're doing Freedom Summer. He said, but the only reason why we were impactful was because Fannie Lou Hamer knew all the people. He said, we may have helicoptered in, but when we knocked on the door, they answered because someone had already laid the groundwork. And when that person ran for office, they lost. Okay, so the floor is open.
Thank you all very much. This was a very affirming panel. I need y'all to do this in front of other funders as well, because I'm an artist and executive director. And I say a lot of these points you all are saying with other funders, yet y'all are not a lot of the other funders that exist. And so narrative is not something that I feel like folks understand or want to invest in. And so for those conversations, I'm wondering if you have any tips around how to pitch this work, talk about the longevity when funders are only really asking for these vanity metrics. What are the ways that we can start to better connect our work to funders who might not understand the power of narrative and culture?
I'll just say from the position of being a filmmaker, also trying to figure out how to fund this work. I made a documentary that took 8.5 years about a very pressing political moment. We just, so you all know, there is a fully ratified 28th Amendment to the Constitution. It's an equal rights amendment. And I've talked to 30 people this weekend who didn't know that. And we got funding and lost funding from people who were like, guess what? I decided my Christian faith doesn't allow me to fund gender equity work. Crazy things happened in that project. And I was chasing funders who were explicitly out there apparently funding this work and would not give us the time of day. And we didn't, we were running out of time to get this to the community. And so we turned to crowdfunding, and we did a crowdfunding campaign in partnership with the organizations who were already on board, where we didn't have friction. And it was robust enough that funder that we could not pull off the sidelines finally called me back and wrote a check. And so sometimes I'm like, we can't be on their timeline. And audience still, community still is the only thing, that's the only lever we reliably have that nobody can tell us we can't reach. that has no gatekeeping. It's just a matter of like how much kind of like elbow grease are we willing to put into that. And I know you have a ton of experience on that. But my thing is like, we just go be undeniable. What did you say about like, while we go make the work look irresistible, sometimes we can't wait for them to fund us to do that. We just have to like figure out, and what I would say is I do that locally. So I stopped trying to think in terms of like social media vanity metrics. And it's like, who can I literally touch in my community and get in a room together that will build that kind of momentum? And I find that that is often like nearly frictionless. And then the things that we are able to demonstrate can draw the more institutional capital.
Okay.
If that's what you decide then you want. Because sometimes you do such a good job, you're like, fuck it, I don't need you. So.
I agree with everything Emily said. And I think one of the things that, to go back to something I said earlier, is that we have to realize sometimes that narrative requires an understanding of language that sometimes funders that we're trying to talk to don't have. So sometimes you really are the translation point. We had a conversation with a funder that was new to storytelling as a political strategy. And we had to break down in something they understood. It was hard to understand a movie, but they understood the crash test dummies. So talk about how people went from fighting, the literal crash test dummies. Yeah. But, right? But at one point in time, people did not want to wear seatbelts. There was no chime when you didn't put your seatbelt on. But that's an example of narrative change. It's just outside
Designated
of
drivers.
culture. Designated drivers. There are so many things. Smoking. It went from being something that everybody did, and culture changed it. And so sometimes being able to take it from the space where we want to see change in racial justice, gender justice, climate justice, and make it concrete. Like say the words, like it took 30 years for people to understand the dangers of secondhand smoke, but this is how it was done. It took 15 years, but it was a collaboration between the NTSB and creatives that made the crash test dummies that became a Saturday morning cartoon. That's narrative change. So sometimes being that translation point to make it concrete allows people to understand how to invest in you. And you teach people how to treat you. And that's part of it. Yeah.
Two more questions. What's that?
Oh yeah, I'll make this quick. Film for good fun, Kareem. It's really revolutionary what y'all have done here, and I want to make sure, like, when we all go home, like, what's the next best step to make sure that the solidarity around narrative power to get free flowing funding to the Bliss collectives and kinfolks and all these beautiful people, like what you're saying, we want this to exist in 20 years. So when we're building those third spaces, like, how do we connect back to what the Solidarity House is doing?
Okay, I have a pitch. I really want us to all crowdfund a media holding company. Because do you guys know what a media holding company does? Okay, so like
Maybe just give us a little.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So yeah. So a media holding company, like Disney is a media holding company because they have all these different properties that live within the company, but they all share like a lawyer, HR, marketing, etc. So it diffuses the cost for everyone. Like whether you're Star Wars or Marvel or whatever, you have the same marketing team, right? We need to do mutual aid and like own our own stuff, like so badly. I think that the only sustainable thing for artists in the future is to continue to own their own content and for us to protect it. And so I would love, like, I know this is a really big pitch, but I would love us, just the same way that we crowdfunded Solidarity House, we should have a media holding company.
Yeah, we're trying to get out of it.
Good morning, everybody. My voice is a little bit gone. It's been a time. It's been great. Thank you all so much for this panel this morning. It's been really nourishing, so thank you. So as someone who wants to enter this culture change space, I would add a two-part question. One is, if you can go back in time and tell yourself something when you first started this journey, doing this work, what would you tell yourself? And two, what skills do you believe are most urgently needed to really move this culture change space forward? Thank you.
I mean, I don't think that's a very great question, and I think can be answered in a myriad of ways. But I would say like one thing is just being more embedded in community. Go to your local like community center, go to your local like council member, see what they are working on, council member that you're aligned to, and see what they're working on, and see if there is a way to develop a partnership that will help your community. I think I wish I would have done that when I was first starting out, because I think we all get in our little lanes and our bubbles, and we go and to the same, we hang out with friends at similar places. And I think that's largely what's been missing from, during COVID. I think we were all online and we're like, we can Zoom this. And one thing that I've started, especially this year, is especially with our grant partners, especially folks that we work with, whether that be artists or like legislators or anyone in our community, I'm going and getting a coffee now. I am not doing a Zoom meeting. I am not doing email chain. We all have to email. But I'm really trying to make anything that could be an email into an in-person meeting. And I really think that we have the answers that we need in our communities. And the more that we can take little actions every day, that doesn't have to be like, oh, this is what I want to do in 2025. I want to meet, I want to do X project. I want to do, spend Y amount of my money for this cause. Take little steps every day. Make that meeting a coffee. Make it a meal. I think that's a small way, at least for me, I wish I would have started doing more.
Reach across communities. As someone who has fallen down deep rabbit holes of strange niches, from streetwear to experimental film to doc film. Sometimes I look up and I'll be like, dang, where's some people from 10 years ago? And then they look around and it's like, what happened to John? It's important to stay in conversations with people across communities and network with them, because we all have something to offer and share with each other. And I think that's where strength and solidarity really exists. All right, well, thanks again for joining this session at Solidarity House, which is organized
Thank you.
by a coalition of over 50 movement builders within a surrounding the independent film community. We invite you to hold close a reminder that solidarity across infrastructure means recognizing that our organizations are stronger when we share knowledge, pull resources, and coordinate strategy across the ecosystem. So as we exit, please introduce yourself to two new people and share two things. First, share your most urgent, yes, yet accomplishable dream. And second, a challenge you are currently facing. Make one ask and one offer of support, but resist the urge to be transactional. Ask for something from one person, offer something to the next, and trust that in solidarity, the community is caring for all. Please check out the schedule of remaining events by scanning the QR codes around the room or online. Let's stay connected and continue to build. Thank you all for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.